Hello again. Glad to see everyone again, having sweets in their hands. I'm a little bit jealous. Let's just wait for a second. Yeah. I'll
my
grab something later, thank you. Yeah, it's great to see you all again at the second day of our convention. I hope you're all enjoying your time here in Hamburg. After yesterday's very interesting first Artist Curator Talk, I'm very curious to see what's going to happen and also listen to what's going to happen today. So we go into a second round of the Artist Curator Talks, and again, you are all invited to ask your questions whenever they pop up. I know this didn't work quite well yesterday, but we will try it better today. I want to present you two very special persons today. We have here today Ana Brzezińska. She works as an XR curator and creative producer, and she is responsible for immersive programming at Tribeca Festival in New York. And with us today is also Tamiko Thiel, and it really has to be said that you are a pioneer in the field of digital art, with over 30 years of experience. That's crazy. And your works have already been shown at the Whitney Museum of American Art and also at the MoMA in New York. So I'm very happy that both of you are here today. You both also brought some presentations with you to give us some insights into their work before we start the talk. And Tamiko, I'll hand over to you so you can start introducing.
All right, thanks so much for inviting me. The image that you see is me as a graduate student when I was still a mechanical engineer, mechanical product design engineer. But I ended up coming to Europe, going to art school. And then in the mid-90s, after graduating from art school in Munich, actually, I was back in San Francisco. And I had done some computer graphics programming while I was a grad student at MIT, which is where the photo was taken. But then it wasn't until the mid-90s that I actually decided that I wanted to start doing virtual reality. It had just become possible to do it on PCs, and my first job was actually as creative director and producer, not as an artist myself, working together with Steven Spielberg on a project that was the first 3D metaverse for children, Starbright World. This only ran 94 to 97, but it really set the tone for a lot of ways that I approached virtual reality. You see the quality that we had then was 640 by 480, very painful. You see also that the children were not wearing headsets. They were looking at the virtual world on a monitor using a mouse to run through it. These were seriously ill children who were involved in the Starbright project, and they were already connected to plenty of machines. They already were nauseous from their medication. They didn't need virtual reality to make them even sicker. So when I started working on my first own art project together with Zara Hushman. We were both producers at Worlds Incorporated, the company where I was working on Starbright World. The specific focus of this project, Manzanar was one of the 10 incarceration camps built in World War II to intern Japanese Americans. And we decided that to create a piece that layered that experience with experiences of Iranian Americans who were also threatened with internment later. But it was clear to me that I wanted the project to be accessible to people who had been in the camps. And most of them were very old, a lot were veterans. And I figured, okay, if you can use a very simple joystick to navigate in a wheelchair through real space, then you should be able to do that in virtual space. And because the headsets were still so awful, I did it as a 2D projection, but wall-sized, with the image going almost down to the floor because the body perceives it as the space. And because of the state of computer graphic tools at that time, it had to be very simple. The buildings are simply planes, but we took archival photographs, put them inside, and used a lot of very surrealistic elements that I won't go into now, but maybe we can come back. Here's just a couple of scenes of the layers of Iranian-American history during the hostage crisis, when they were also threatened with internment. And you can see we're using very surrealistic spaces. They're not realistic spaces, but then we have devices, for instance, when you go into the Iranian-American dream room and see photographs of Iranians assimilating, becoming American citizens. You go too close to the images, the wall turns transparent, and you see the outdoor images, the media images that see you as a terrorist. I did another piece I won't talk about here, and then this third piece on the Berlin Wall, same sort of projection. We had more money. We had 110,000 from the Berlin Senate, which was a lot of money in those days for a VR project, and did a linear kilometer of the Berlin Wall on both the west side and the east side, where you have very different experiences if you approach the wall. So I've done a number of pieces with the current VR technology, but I still feel very confined. I love the stereo aspect of VR headsets, but I feel very confined being in there all alone. And so this is a first trial of a piece, Atmosphäre, on the changing nature of the Earth's atmosphere, that I created for the Quest headset. But here's a test at the Onyx studio of the NASA Foundation in New York, where I'm testing it out for the first time recently as an immersive space, and I hope to find a venue that will show that. I'm working right now on finishing up a piece that uses similar symbolism of using the Lewis structures to make invisible gases that all seem to be the same to us, apparent in terms of their structure. And here you have 4 bowls with each of the 4 elements. And when you touch the bowl in real life, it releases that substance into the virtual world. So Atmosphäre was just about the atmosphere. This is about the elements necessary to form the world and to enable life on the planet. We don't know the exact way that it happens, but this takes you through an experience that goes through a possible pathway, and I hope to also change this from a single helmet experience to a spatial experience where many people can be in the room at the same time and triggering the bowls. I started working with augmented reality in 2010 with an incursion into the Museum of Modern Art in New York with what became my artist group, and Manifest.ar. But I want to show you this piece. The VR pieces that I showed you before took 5 years, each of them, partly because I was doing almost all the work by myself. But this piece, Carnation Rain, I was in Lisbon. I realized I was around the corner from the square where the Carnation Revolution started, where the military actually overthrew their own dictator to install a democracy, and to show that they were of peaceful intent, put carnation flowers in the barrels of their guns. So I had a structure that already enabled me in AR to have objects raining down from the sky. I found an image of our carnation on the internet, and really from beginning to end, that was 2 hours before from the first idea to when I made this documentation. So after spending 15 years to only do 3 pieces, when I realized I could do, AR pieces in maybe as little as a couple of hours, this was really where I've put a lot of my energy in the subsequent time. I've also taught groups of people to use AR. The first time was working with Puerto Rican Americans, Afro-Caribbean Americans in East Harlem. You might know better as Spanish Harlem. Still the poorest and most violent part of all of New York, but teaching their kids. This was in 2012, when I would be at art conferences, and the art world people would be saying, how could you use a medium like a smartphone, something that only a few of us privileged, rich, white people will ever own? And when I, in that year, talked to the Maria Morena Vega of the Caribbean Cultural Center and African Diaspora Institute in East Harlem about the concept of AR, she immediately said, oh my God, this is a way that our kids can see their culture and their history and their heroes and their own art on their streets without going into a white cube where they feel totally unwelcome and don't have the $25 anyway. So, I taught a number of their artists how to make augmented reality. Unfortunately, we were using commercial apps, and a year or two after that, that app went out of business. So basically, since then, my husband, who's a software developer, has written our own app, and we've used that primarily. Two pieces that are here with historic content: Revolution and Return, which is actually set in front of the Paulskirche in Frankfurt, where the first attempt at creating a democratic German constitution happened in 1848. The gameplay of the app actually follows the course of the revolution. There are these silver coins with the images of the rulers raining from the sky. When you click on them, they explode and turn into documents that were the draft documents for the first constitution. What happens after a while is that gold coins with the images of the King of Prussia and the Emperor of Austria start raining from the sky. When you click on them, they do not explode. They start playing parts of the victory marches for those two rulers, and after a while, the gold coins basically cover all of the documents of democracy. And that's what happened. They had enough money, they sent in their soldiers, put those German rulers back into power. And here is a slightly different type of memorialization. There is a statue of Juliet Capulet, Juliet from Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, in Munich. And it turns out that, you know, all over the world, there are a lot of people touch statues. You'll kiss the feet of statues to get power from that saint or that god depicted in the statue. Well, Juliet, they grab her breast to bring themselves luck and love. And in the context of the Me Too discussion, there was people were saying, well, should we like cover her up? And I'm going like, yeah, right, you want to put a burqa on her or what? So my favorite solution would be to have a statue of Romeo right next to him, wearing, of course, that necessary piece of Renaissance fashion, the codpiece. And then people could like take their photographs with like one hand on each, and there would be a gender balance there. But since that type of statue is very expensive, what I did with AR as part of the Aurora Make Us Visible Augmented Monuments project is to put images of that same statue, but one as an Amazon warrior, the other as a Viking shield maiden, both of whom are said to have bared their best to go into war, showing their breasts not as a sign of submission and sexual availability, but as a sign of strength, and we're going to whoop your ass. So, I think that's my last slide. Oh, sorry. Just one quick thing. I wanted to show this as an example of how exactly the same piece can look completely different in two different immersive environments. Meet Digital Arts Center in Milan, 15 video-mapped screens, and here also a couple places where we were able to insert live screens, live AR screens where you can see yourself as part of the artwork. This is the theme of plastic pollution underwater. And then here, exactly the same content, but we only had 6 really lousy projectors, VGA projectors, if you know what that is. Very small images, and this is in an unused underpass at the Regensburg train station, and by angling those lousy little projectors so the image sort of smeared over the walls and the floor, we got this amazing immersive space with really, really lousy equipment. So it's not about the quality of your technology. I maintain reality is vastly overrated. I think of making things, because I'm usually an individual with either myself or only a couple of people working with me for very little money. I think of the idea of creating poetry, the idea of creating visual haiku instead of a narrative, instead of a feature film. And that power can be much greater than reality. Now I think I really am finished. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Woo!
Well, I mean, I want to say that I'm so impressed with Tamiko's artistic practice, and I will definitely want to try and keep this conversation focused on her art. But also I want to add some bridges to everything that was said here today and yesterday, and I just want to, say that this is an incredible event. I'm truly happy to be here. The program is fantastic, and the talks that I've listened to are so inspiring that I'm definitely taking home a lot of new insights. But before we get to building those bridges between what is happening here and what we can maybe discuss with Tamiko with regards to her practice, I just want to introduce myself briefly. I have a couple slides, promise to keep it short, and then we'll switch to talking a little bit in depth about some of your works. I have two in particular that I would like to discuss in detail. So this is me. All right. So, well, we'll get to that part. So my name is Ana Brzezińska, and as Diana kindly said, I'm the curator at Tribeca Festival, where I'm responsible for the immersive strand. Tribeca is one of the largest festivals that has originally started as a film festival, but since the launch, we have expanded into various creative disciplines. We are present throughout all the 5 boroughs of New York City, and Immersive has been part of our programming for over 13 years now. I also work, because I'm based in Europe, so I work with the European Commission as their expert advisor on the Creative Europe Media program. So I'm involved in various projects in various roles, and then I have some 20 years of production and creative production experience, which is something I should not say because that reveals my age. But what is fantastic about the type of work that people like us are allowed to do is that we constantly meet with new projects, with new types of creativity, new types of creators, studios, producers, venues, and it's just so amazing to be able to process information from all these various parts of the stage, and I'm privileged to engage with some 400 projects every year, spanning VR, AR, AI, but also, innovation within the startup ecosystem. So, this is what I do, and then I kind of do it wearing different hats depending where I can be useful. So, obviously, curation is an important part of my practice, but I've been producing audiovisual works for many, many years. I work for big television broadcasting companies, for independent agencies, but I also do a lot of consultancy and mentoring where I try to help other creators or other professionals, and these are some of the companies or organizations that I recently work with. Yes, but I wanted to tell you a little bit about Tribeca so you understand a little bit more about where I come from as a curator, specifically working for Tribeca at this moment. So I've delivered so far 3 exhibitions, and each one was different because we've been showcasing various art forms for a number of years. It started with my predecessor, Lauren Hammonds, a really a person that was loved by the community who was working mainly with VR in the beginning and having a virtual arcade, and then we were trying to expand depending on what the community was telling us. And so this year, because the festival takes place in June, we made an edition that was really a completely new approach to how we wanted to I would say, explore the potential of immersive art. And so we worked with a brand new venue that opened in Lower Manhattan early this year called Mercer Labs. It's an incredible space that I do recommend you to see whenever you have a chance. It's a three-story building equipped with the best technology that exists currently on the market, with over 15 rooms where you would have various ways of experiencing spatial art or screen-based art. And so we kind of like jump on the opportunity to build a partnership. And my goal as a curator, and I'm just going to really briefly mention that, was to work with the creators from our community, creators who build their way through independent spatial and digital storytelling, and give them that opportunity to have a truly huge stage to present their craftsmanship, their artistic vision, and to make sure that we can really see if we are ready to work with mass audiences the way we've been dreaming about for so many years. So we commissioned original works by 6 artists, including Memo Acton and his partner Katie Payton. We worked with a very young artist from Taiwan, Wenyi Xie, but we also had worked with ScanLab projects that are very well known, a scanning team from London, and audio multimedia artist Robertina Sibianic, who worked with Monum, a 4D sound studio from Berlin, and then some of my good friends and favorite artists, Liam Young, who is an architect and a world builder, and Sutu, who also has been building the immersive community for many, many years. And so what we had is we've built a show that we presented during the festival, but then it was so successful that the venue decided to keep it for almost 7 weeks. And in 7 weeks, we had over 50,000 people going through that space. So we were really, really encouraged by those numbers. And especially that when I was still in New York and I was coming to the space every day to look at our public and to understand who is actually spending $52 to buy a ticket to come and see what we do. And people were incredible. You have people coming with their families, children, grandparents, tourists, because obviously this is a very tourist heavy space. But contrary to what expected by many, that people are just going to run through the space, take a photo, post it on Instagram, and call it a day, people were actually like sitting down in the spaces, staying there for half an hour, 40 minutes. And then when you looked at them closely, you could tell that if they do take a photo, it's because they appreciate the beauty of the experience they're part of. So it was a whole different experience for me that gave me so much hope about where we can go with what we have built so far as an artistic community. The beauty of the artworks that were broken into 3 chapters, we were rotating our program daily to change the experience, and we were only in 5 rooms. The beauty of these artworks is absolutely stunning, and if any of you represent venues, I'm happy to share a catalog, because I think these artists deserve that their works are being shown. This is the 4D sound experience that we built with Robertina Sibianic in the audio room. We were working in 2 infinity rooms, which was quite a challenge because infinity rooms are traditionally associated with Kusama. And so we were trying to say, can we actually bring different types of storytelling into that space? And we did commission 2 completely new works, very, very different. This one is particularly dear to my heart because this is a creator that is not even 25 years old. He debuted at Tribeca 2 years ago, and since then he's been very successful. This is an LED volumetric display for which we adapted an existing work called Planet City, and this is also something that is traditionally used, for like trade shows or like places where you would just have something that looks nice and is quite dazzling, but we really wanted to tell a narrative. We wanted to build a narrative experience in this amazing operatic space. This is a generated piece by Memo Acton. I shouldn't probably say it. I think this is really the best thing he's ever made. It's so incredible. It's such a beautiful piece, co-created with his partner, who's a choreographer and dancer. You have these morphing structures that are surrounding you, and then they're built on top of the actual choreography that Katie performed. And then Memo transformed it with, obviously, a custom-made algorithm into these various life forms that we are kind of like part of, and we share the same ecosystem with them. But we came from a very traditional background in terms of having, a traditional virtual reality show. We were doing this for over 10 years in Spring Studios. And then I just want to say that we worked with really incredible local and international artists throughout that space. The photo you see here is representing the installation by Kinfolk, an AR studio from New York led by Idris Brewster. Everyone should know about their work. I just want to say it. I know Idris was part of the jury for the Stiftung Award, but this is just really someone who is breaking new grounds. He built this foundation and this app from scratch where he's building digital monuments of Black leaders that were forgotten by history in New York City, and he's putting them out there and using geolocalized technology, building a whole educational curriculum around it, and really expanding this into a model for other creators to follow. But then we work also with amazing artists like Shirin Nishat. We were privileged to have a world premiere of her first virtual reality experience. We were also presenting games made for VR, and then HoloLens experiences like Color Noir that famously won the first Immersive Award in Cannes a year after it premiered at Tribeca, being the first festival to show it after the Centre Pompidou launch. This is a little bit of a highlight of how we approached the visual design of our space when we were still in our previous format, and these are some of the highlights of the works that I'm very proud that I managed to bring to our public. So as you see, really the difference between these works is quite significant, but it was really highly curated, and I love the fact that our show had over 80% of female-created works in 2023. But we also worked with artists, Marshmallow Laserface. And I want to say that we also had a virtual edition of the festival that was a consequence of the pandemic. And this is actually how we met. I was building virtual worlds for Tribeca and for other clients before I actually got with them as a curator. And so we had a virtual garden where we exhibited works for visitors who couldn't be in New York. So this is technically what I've been doing in the past 3 years, but this is not what we're here for.
Thank you for presenting this to us. Thank you. But I know, Anna, that you have a lot of questions.
Oh,
for
yes.
Tamiko, but
Oh.
as I said, you're all invited. So if anything pops up, please let us know.
I have a lot of questions because I've taken many notes, and I've taken notes yesterday because after Michael Rothberg's amazing talk, I went to my room and I revisited Tamiko's practice, and I was really finding these bits and pieces of connections that I found extremely interesting, and I'm not sure if I really have questions. I want to kind of like just start that conversation by kind of like saying first, like, so you made an extraordinary VR experience without using a VR headset that's called Beyond Manzanar, which was a virtual replica of a detention camp built by the Americans during the Second World War for Japanese American citizens. I had a chance to work with an artist and a team that was working on a similar topic much later, that we premiered at Tribeca 2 years ago, which was an AR application that you could use scanning actual paintings made by a Japanese American artist. And behind those paintings that were portraits of former of the camp survivors, there were stories that were told by them. It was a very beautiful experience. But this is really stunning, and I want to say that Michael said something incredibly interesting yesterday, among many interesting things he said. It's about this positive appropriation of language that we can perform across different types of memories. And I was thinking about how important appropriation is in fine arts and in art history. And it's a beautiful performing gesture where you actually build on top of someone else's practice or someone else's statement. And I'm looking at this work almost as, this kind of example where, I love the fact that this is such a symbolic space, because instead of creating something that is like a high-level photorealistic replica of the space, where you're guided by a voiceover that is, telling you the story, and we've seen those experiences oftentimes, and they are very useful in certain practices. But personally, I appreciate the symbolic gesture that you deployed here, because it allows me to enter that experience in a much easier way. And I think that I see that this is an example of such a parallel. Also, you've included those imaginary landscapes that are almost an imagination of like, what is it that kept the prisoners alive when they were there, because they had the memory of this other reality that they miss. And then on top of this, you added the same kind of experience for people who were, I would say, the victims of what was happening in Iran in late 70s. So this is an extremely, I would say, inclusive approach. And I want to ask you a little bit about this, and also like the inclusivity through technology is a whole other topic. But let's start with the artistic gesture, because I think this is the most interesting part of it.
Yeah, well, it actually started when both Zara and I were working as producers at this company, Worlds Incorporated. And in 1995, there happened the worst terrorist attack to that date on American soil, the Oklahoma City bombing. And within the first couple days of that bombing, the media were full, well, it's probably Islamic terrorists, because there had been a bombing 2 years earlier, an attempt to bomb the World Trade Center, and those were Islamic terrorists. So it turns out that Zara, right at that time, the day after the bombing, was going into a meditation retreat in the high Sierras in Eastern California, not far from the site of Manzanar. She's Iranian American, and she was terrified that when she came out of this, 1 week silent workshop where you had no contact to any media, she would find a policeman standing at the door saying, Iran was behind this. We are now interning all people of Iranian ancestry in camps like we did to the Japanese Americans in World War II. And when she came out, she found out, no, it was homegrown American white right-wing terrorists who had done the bombing and killed, hundreds of school kids and stuff. Yeah. So with a funny feeling of relief, she went to the Manzanar site, and she had heard about the internment, and the Japanese Americans had described it as a dry, dusty desert hell. And she went there and she said, this is beautiful. This is like paradise. This looks like the landscapes of Iran, which is a high desert. And she said the only thing left at the camp at that point was the grid of roads, partially tarred roads. But even that reminded her of the grids of Iranian Persian gardens that had been built in the desert and then abandoned and had been taken back by the desert, because walled Iranian gardens are called pardis, which is where we get our name for paradise. And that has gone into the very early sort of Judeo-Christian mythology. So she was talking about gardens in the middle of the desert, and I went, wait a minute. And I remembered a childhood memory when the Japanese American side of my family would gather for Thanksgiving or Christmas dinners. We were a Christian family. Sometimes the adults would start talking about the camps. And I remember one line, the Japanese are crazy. They even started planting flowers in the camps in the middle of the desert. I'm going, wait a minute, what is this? And I went online, and I think I Googled something like, internment camps, gardens, desert, and boom, what comes? A photograph by Ansel Adams of a large garden in the Manzanar internment camp. I take one look at that and said, this is a Japanese paradise garden. There's the rock that represents the turtle and the island that represents the crane, which are marks of a specific type of paradise garden in Japanese culture. And I tell this to Zara, and we look at each other and said, we've got an art project. She wanted to write a poem. I wanted to do it in virtual reality because reading the book Farewell to Manzanar, Jean Wakatsuki Houston talks about how, as a child, of 8 years, she would position herself with a view of exactly that paradise garden in the Manzanar photograph, in the Ansel Adams photograph, and try not to move, because as soon as she moved, she would see the guard tower and she'd see the barbed wire in the barracks. But if she could just stay there and be absolutely rock still, she could pretend that she was in paradise of her own accord. And there was this moment in the, you probably didn't notice, but this moment where you enter the barracks and you're trapped in there with a ghost. There's a strange room at the end. You go into this Japanese room, and then all of a sudden, the world changes around you. You're still in Manzanar. You still see the very distinctive mountains of Manzanar, but it's framed by a Japanese paradise garden instead of by guard towers and barbed wire. And then when you enter that garden, it disappears. You fall back into the camp. So that was my way in virtual reality of capturing this moment that Jean Wakatsuki Houston talked about in her book, about how your own movements tear you out of paradise and throw you back into prison. And I thought that's something that only virtual reality can do in this way, that it's your own feeling of movement.
And it also brings us to the part about, you know, how complex and how complicated somehow it is to design an experience. That when we say, you know, we speak about empathy, we speak about, you know, this embodied experience of the past, but like when you really like go deeper into this, you know, the fact that something is photorealistic and being narrated the way you would read it in a book, it doesn't necessarily mean that the impact that you expect it to have will be exactly the same, because sometimes having that gesture of being able to allow you to use your own imagination and to kind of like interiorize the metaphor and then try to figure out what that metaphor might mean for you and then what it meant for the person who was actually going through that experience is something completely different. And when I also look at it from, you know, the perspective of the type of visuals, the type of light, the mountains, everything, I think this is a fantastic story, what you just described, how it came to be. But there's also something truly impressive about the fact that these contrasts between, you know, the beauty of certain views or the beauty of certain memories put in that context actually makes the experience much more dramatic and much more tragic. Because when you go into a dark space and, you know, the rain is falling, it doesn't mean it's going to be more dramatic, you know. It's just showing that you are trying to put a lot of emphasis on your own respect towards what you actually do, but it doesn't mean your artistic gesture will be more efficient. So I think this is a truly incredible approach, and also, you know, there are many other artworks that it makes me think of. But I also want to ask you about this soul and this kind of like true, you know, axis of what is the uniqueness of the fact that this is a virtual reality experience. Even if you don't use a headset, the methodology of building this space is immersive. So in a way, I want to ask you about this because, you know, there are so many different opinions on this, and, you know, audience members and curators and artists have a different outlook on this. I personally come from a group, I'm not particularly a fan of photorealism in VR because this is not this is not the reason why I'm going to VR in the first place. And then I'm always interested in the metaphor and the gesture rather than someone offering me a replica of something that is just, you know, a version of the world I could see or I could imagine myself. So I wonder what is essential for you when you choose this as your medium, when you choose it as your means of expression, and what makes it different for you from using any other types of medium. And then we'll probably pivot to AR because that's a whole other story which is equally important in I guess, in your practice.
I mean, there's a lot of components of that. Part of it What? Mach ruhig bis... Achso, danke.
Sorry.
I think that was some information for me.
Yeah.
For me.
Part of it is really historical in the resources I had available at the time. I actually was offered I was offered 20,000 euros by Gerfried Stocke of Ars Electronica to build this in their cave, and it's probably stupid to turn that down, but the problem is if I had built it in that cave, then people would have to go to Ars Electronica to see it. And my personal experience trying to see Chardavi's Osmose at Ars Electronica was the line was so long I never got a chance. I've never seen her work live.
Which is the experience of many people who try to see, digital works that were, highly inaccessible.
Right, and because I was trying to enable as many people as possible to see that, I said, okay, it's got to be then with really simple technology, and it's got to be something that I can mostly do myself. I typed in, with the exception of this one structure here, everything in this thing I typed in by hand in a text file.
Oh.
That's VRML.
Wow.
I kid you not, and I can show you the text files. Anyway, so that was a very real world limitation on what I can do. It's very texture heavy, which was unusual at that time. But then, after starting out on this track and saying, I want to use sort of minimalist technology, so I have the freedom to, for instance, not plan everything in advance. I have done some projects with more funding. The Berlin Wall had much more funding, and there, I think the more people you get involved in it, the more it tends to sort of realism because it's a lot easier to say, build something that looks exactly like this photograph, rather than saying, build something that, indicates this, this object, but it's not really like that and somehow has evocative, poetic power. And then also just the fact that, I'm a tinkerer as an artist. I'm not a planner. I don't want to be like commanding, vast numbers of people. I want to be able to kind of sit there on my own and see what happens, what evolves in front of me on the screen. And this kind of means that I have the freedom and the problem of doing much of it myself, and using kind of the most strategic use of my time, and because all of these tools like Unreal and the complicated 3D modeling and animation came out after I'd already started working in VR, then I'm also not really good at using them. And anyone who's graduated from a media art program can, model and animate and texture and do lighting so much better than I can.
Well, but we know that sometimes, this is really not the most important part of the process more often than not. I want to mention the experience that, Shirin Nishat did in VR, which was her first virtual reality work. It was part of a larger 2-channel video installation. So she took one scene out of the larger installation, she made it in VR, and then you see the VR piece first, and then you see the whole story that kind of gives you a little more of a background from 2 different perspectives of the woman and the soldier who's her oppressor. But then the VR scene is super simple. It's a 360 camera being put in a warehouse. There's a very simple staging, free cuts, 8 minutes, nothing fancy. And this is one of the most powerful works I've ever seen made in VR. And it does sometimes happen that people who are expecting, a lot of, I would say quality, VR design or interaction, they would say like, well, what's novel about it? It's like, it's not about what it's novel about, it's how powerful that is because it uses the medium in the most perfect way possible. So it's really not about technology. And I think this experience proves that, you can have a very enriching experience that gives you space for thought and analysis and that is open to all, without having the fancy graphics and what have you.
Yeah, there's actually a book, and I'm blanking. Was it Scott Adams and What Do Comics Mean or something? hopefully someone in the audience knows, a book about how comics work, the semiotics of comics, if you will. And one of his big points was that the more abstract, the more room there is for the imagination of the reader or the viewer. And I think that's also something that I really strive for.
And what is really, I'm so sorry to cut you up, but this is really very interesting because, Jaron Lanier, our, the grandfather of us all, he really always emphasized that VR is really about you, right? It's always about you. It's about the user.
Yeah.
And so when you give that space for imagination, this is where you open the space for the so-called empathy, because you suddenly start to put yourself in a position where it unlocks your own memories and your own anxiety and your own pain that you've been through or that you can somehow get access to, and otherwise you wouldn't be able to do it. But it's a very sophisticated and complex process, contrary to how augmented reality works. And I want to say that I want to pivot to this because I was thinking again about your contribution to the AR art making when I was thinking about, Michael's talk yesterday about the monuments, should we take them down or not? And then I thought about Idris and how he's building his own monuments using the technology that his generation owns and giving himself that freedom. But then, so you were part of the group that created what is called Manifest AR. And you made those various interventions in different places. And I particularly love the intervention that you did at the Venice Biennale. That was 2011. 2011?
Yes.
Right, 2011, Venice Biennale. What happens is that there's an announcement on the Biennale website, which is almost hacked. And there's this announcement saying, we are informing the curator, we are informing the public that parmi the pavilions presenting the official selection on the Venice Biennale, there will be one more, which will be invisible. But here it is. And this is this AR pavilion that suddenly grows in the middle of the actual Biennale, which is a fantastic hack. And I'm thinking about AR and how you kind of, through the manifest I read that you were part of, that this is really about those layers of reality that we put on top of the actual reality in order to change it. So this is almost, I remember my own thinking about it, which is actually inspired by, gardening, which is if you leave layers of things on top of the soil, they will eventually become one, and the soil will change. It will be enriched. This is why you should never take your leaves in the autumn and fall and just throw them away. Just leave them on the ground. It's going to be really better for your tomatoes. So I'm thinking about AR as a social practice in a way where if we put these layers there and people can contribute to them and they can add their own visions and stories, like, will the world start changing? I want to say yes. What's your take on this?
Oh, definitely. In fact, starting with VR, it was also the feeling of like, okay, in order to, for instance, put some sort of monument at the Manzanar internment campsite, you need immense numbers of permissions, etc. But look, Zara and I can just build this. It took us 5 years, but we can just build this ourselves. We don't need anyone's permissions. And then after, doing like over 15 years, it took me, I only got 3 works done, and I was getting desperate. Like, I'm getting older, and I can only make, another 5 to 10 works before I die. And then friends of mine, Mark Squarek and Sander Wienhof, all of a sudden said, hey, we can use AR to invade MoMA, and we don't need their permission, and they can't stop us either. And I suddenly realized I've always done site-specific VR, and if I want to do site-specific AR, I don't have to rebuild the site. It's already there. I can do it really quickly. And also, the thing that had been bothering me about the Manzanar piece was, of course, that site used to be where the Native American Paiute Indians lived. There's a whole other story of their expulsion that happened on Independence Day in 18, I forget what. That should be the story also. So I've always been very conscious that any site has so many different layers and so many different stories, and each story might come from a completely different group and you don't know each other's stories. In AR, you can put thousands of stories on exactly the same site. And
they would not conflict because there's enough
conflict.
space for everyone.
Right, right. And that's what AR gives you. And that's what we've done, for instance, with these community projects in San Jose, Japantown, and in El Barrio, East Harlem, is that, sometimes they're different sites, sometimes they're the same sites in it, and it doesn't matter because there are so many stories. And this was really, when I started using AR, I really felt like this is a mission that, well, for VR also, both things are ways that a single person or a small number of individuals working together can give an incredibly rich story from a group that hasn't been represented in the stories that get passed on. This is a way for everybody to be able to start creating their own stories. And I'm so happy that there's been kind of this explosion in the number of people who have the skills now to create VR and AR and tell everybody, like, look, anybody coming out of art school is going to okay, here's my object, here's my painting, here's my video, here's my AR. It's one of the tools. And also the thing, when I was going through art school in the 80s, people literally said, you have to decide, are you a painter or are you a sculptor? There wasn't any media art there, except they didn't even think about video art. But, a serious artist had one medium. And that's fallen away just because all of the, you have thousands of art students coming out of the art academies every single year, and they're doing everything.
On the other hand, what I want to say is that this is really true, but I know we're running out of time.
Yes.
But there was an amazing exhibition in 1993 at the Guggenheim Museum, which was the first exhibition of virtual reality, which is called Virtual Reality as a New Medium, or something like that. And when you watch a video that is available online from that show, they commissioned a work from Jenny Halser, who made this tunnel where you can just swim and do things. This is amazing because when you listen to the curator and the guests and the artists involved, they're using the exact same language that we're still using today. The same promise, the same dreams, the same goals. And if you kind of just listen to the narrative behind the video without seeing the visuals, you'd say that was recorded yesterday. So in a way, the technology has made significant progress, and we have grown a lot of skills and a lot of awareness and a significant community. But in terms of really kind of nailing down what is the true superpower of these technologies, it seems like we're still in that kind of nascent moment. We still haven't really figured out, we still are not in a place where those dreams that those people were mentioning and that we still mention when trying to explain what we do, we're still not there yet. It's a very good thing because that means we have a lot of work.
I feel like maybe we as a we as a society, maybe we're not all there, but I feel like for me as an artist, I'm in my sweet spot. I'm there. I can do whatever I want, wherever I want. It can be huge. It can be vast in size, like my 3 VR worlds. It can be just localized here. It's an incredible freedom that I have, where I don't have to, rely on some gallerist exhibiting the piece in order to show it. I can show it. That's what the promise of Manifestar and our manifesto was that we can put our work wherever we want, whether it's a curated space or not.
I'm so sorry to have to stop you here, but I didn't keep my promise to also let the audience speak, so I'm sorry for that. But maybe we can have one question. We have 1 minute left. Who wants to go? Here is one person. Can we just have the mic? But I mean, you will be here for a little bit more. Yeah.
Yeah, so, I'm here until the end
ask
of the
your
day.
questions.
Thanks very much. You both kind of touched on this a little bit, but as a creator and as a curator, do you feel like there are emerging archetypes for storytelling in AR and VR, or is it becoming more fixed and repeatable ways to tell stories, these mediums?
want to hear your. I've got an opinion on that, but maybe she has a.
I mean, I can only speak from the perspective of what I see. So I don't see all of the things that are happening. I would say that there's a growing level in general of the quality of how people use these technologies to build experiences. So people are more and more, I would say, skilled in building various types of experiences. And there's always at least a couple works every year that are mind-blowing for some reason, you know, and they always come from very unexpected places. So you never know where this is going to actually come from. Nothing to do with budgets, to be honest. But no, really, I mean, it doesn't mean that the execution is always perfect, but the concept, I mean, the experience proper. But I would say I personally think we have reached a certain plateau where works become more and more similar. And I think this is coming from the fact that a lot of the practice is supported through the system that was funding films. And film industry has very particular ways in which things should be done, both on the production side and then on the distribution side. And I suspect that a lot of that has kind of like bleeded into at least the narrative part of the VR creative scene. And this is something that I particularly, I find a little worrying, but I know that there will be always these emerging voices that will suddenly come up with a concept that will be just terrific. And luckily, there's always a lot of works out there that are surprisingly good.
Yeah, I was going to say something similar, so I'm glad to hear it from you first. That you know, as I mentioned, so 2015 was when this sort of wave of people from the film industry came in, and of course because the VR festivals are all docked on film festivals. That's because the art world was really not interested. So there's this very, very strong push from the VR world, exactly as Ana said, that, you know, they have to be narrative, they have to be characters, you know, you have to, basically, you know, I'm not really so interested in like what a character does or what a character does to another character. For me, it's an encounter between, as you said, this is the character. This is the main character. The person who's encountering that virtual space, whether in VR or AR, this is the main character. And the character development and the dramatic structure should happen in this character's emotional development while going through that piece. And this is what I really stress when I talk about sort of theory in conjunction with my projects. And what I've mostly seen as sort of like the mass of especially VR projects are taking the same sort of film theory stuff where, you know, well, you know, you have to have a really interesting character so that, you know, the person watching can put their interest in that character, and then it's a question of how that character changes over time and stuff like that. And there's, you know, interactive works, there's more interaction between that character and yourself, but still, it's not focusing on what is the emotional development that's happening in this character going through that experience.
Yeah, we can have one more question. Yes. Yay!
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think what's interesting with what you both just said is also the idea now that how do we fund these things, right? Because a few years ago, Meta was still funding art projects, also narrative games, you know, including my own. I mean, they were handing out grants, you know. Of course, they were getting us all in there, funneling us all into their platform, and then saying, nah, we just want Gorilla Tag now, you know. So how do you see these projects? I mean, I know you've commissioned a few for, you know, six I think, for that show, but how do you foresee the future of it, like with public funding getting more and more reduced everywhere, you know, with art festivals not believing in VR because it's too techy, etc. Where do we find the funding? Does Tribeca have some ideas in that sense as well? And like, what has your perspective been on this?
You want to take this one?
My perspective is I've always been a starving artist, and and it looks like it's going to continue that way. I mean, that's not quite fair, but you know, I do get. Basically, I get some funding from people, groups, organizations commissioning things, but yeah, you know, going through the rigmarole of we had this private conversation about this, you know, I don't earn enough to be able to pay someone to take care of the financial aspects and like run off and find all the monies, and because of that, then you know I don't get big monies, so I guess I better keep on, you know, walking a lot and taking a lot of trams instead of, you know, instead of taxis.
I mean, this is a whole conversation, right? So to make it to make that answer as short as possible, and this is, you know, I mean, I cannot speak for Tribeca. I can only speak for myself from, you know, based on what I see and know, also working with a lot of public funds. It is true that you know, because this industry is quite closely related to the tech industry, and the tech industry has its golden rule that it invests the money where actually it pays off. So when you see, you know, these different types of platforms or trends that are being, when we call them, you know, hyped, but sometimes the hype remains something solid and sometimes it disappears. It's always, you know, a testing ground. You know, immersive venues are opening now everywhere. This is definitely a trend. Whether this will be a permanent state of things, that's something we shall see. I think a lot of it depends on us and like to what extent we're present in those spaces and we don't let them just become places where you have very sophisticated, and not with all due respect to screensavers, very sophisticated screensavers. I love screensavers. I want to curate a show of screensavers. But no, but to be very honest, it does feel like, you know, the platforms that used to fund narrative VR are funding games, and they are not interested in narrative VR. So this part of the market is definitely struggling.
They're not even funding games now.
I mean, some of them are, but narrative VR is less of an importance for sure. And I think that, you know, whether public funds will continue to fund them remains a question of two things. One, will decision makers consider this particular part of the scene part of our culture? And then supporting culture is a state obligation. It's something that is almost an ethical obligation that we have. Or whether they will consider that this was just a temporary phenomenon that proved not to be relevant, and so they will just decide not to support it anymore. We'll see. I think this is a general question about how much do we want to fight for supporting independent culture as such. It's not only about VR, it's about the fact that we live in a world where we have increasingly more tools and increasingly less freedom to use them in a way in which we actually should use them.
Yes. Thank you very much to Ana and Tamiko for these very interesting insights. And I mean, you'll find you two here for the next couple of hours, so you can still ask your questions. Thank you very much for this talk.
Thank you for inviting us. Yes, they have to take.
So thank you so much for this interesting